This podcast is part of the Spoon Podcast Network, home of smart conversations that feed your mind.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Food Truths. I'm your host, Eric Schulze. Today on the show, we've got a good friend and also colleague of mine, Saam Shahrokhi. He's the Chief Technology Officer at cultivated fat producer Mission Barns, based in the Bay Area. Saam and I have worked together for a long time. He's the first employee at Mission Barns and one of the first cultivated companies. Today, we talk a little bit about what is cultivated meat. I wanted to wait to talk about this with someone who's also gone through it. And also, Mission Barns recently received their approval from FDA to be the first cultivated fat ever made in the United States and the world that's allowed for sale. So that's very exciting. And I'll talk about a bit about why they chose fat and why they chose to grow animal fat outside of an animal's body. Why did they choose pigs? We talk about the food system and how FDA and USDA work together. It's a fun conversation with a passionate human being who cares a lot about the future of the food system. And one of the few people I think that's also really thinking about the future of the food as a young leader in the space, and a fantastic human being. So without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Saam Shahrokhi, CTO of Mission Barns. We're going to talk about cultivated meat and where we're at it these days. For those of you listening that may be familiar with it, you may have heard of it called lab-grown meat, which, as we'll both tell you, like, we don't like that term. The cultivated meat is animal meat that's grown outside of an animal. It's actual muscle tissue. It's not plant-based. And today we're lucky enough to have Saam, who's worked on, is one of the OGs in this space, and recently garnered the first cultivated fat approval in the world. Also, one of the first employees at his company, Mission Barns, based out of the Bay Area. And so there's a lot to talk about, because I think we've seen a lot of the journey, a lot of the ups and downs of the field. So I think it'd be great to hear from a food innovation side from you, like what's going on. So first off, congratulations on your FDA clearance.
Thank you.
And we'll talk about that approval in a little bit, but where are we in the cultivated meat / cultivated fat space right now? Like where's demand as a food product, and why are you pushing so hard to help Mission Barns get these products into consumers' hands?
Yeah, I think people want alternatives still, right? I think the number one thing that people look at when they try an alternative protein product and don't like it is flavor. When looking at alternative meat products broadly, my thesis kind of over the last 10 years has been that the two drivers ultimately will be product quality and cost. And from a product quality perspective, if the number one thing that people are dissatisfied with is flavor, how can we provide that? And to me, it's making the same thing just in a better way. So in this case, what is in meat the largest contributor to flavor? It's fat. So I think we're working on cultivated pork fat specifically, and combining that cultivated pork fat with plant-based protein to make these hybrid products that essentially have the cost, sustainability, animal welfare, health benefits of plant-based meat, but also bring the flavor, also some health benefits actually, and the sensory profile beyond flavor, also just like mouthfeel benefits of fat in the cultivated form. So I think by providing this hybrid solution, we're addressing kind of both problems.
I think people don't realize how important fat is for meat flavor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what you say is true, but I don't even think sort of in the sort of alt protein world, unless you work in cultivated, how important fat really does drive flavor. I think we call meat protein, but that's really a misnomer,
Mm-hmm.
right? It is a significant source of protein, but in terms of flavor and aroma, protein has almost like none of it on its own. In my opinion, plain protein tastes kind of gross. Like protein powder is kind of gross tasting if it's not flavored.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had like an unmixed blob of protein powder in a smoothie and you're just like, ugh. So I think the myth that protein is flavor it participates in flavor generation, but the real driver is fat,
Mhm.
and fatty acids and other lipids.
Mhm.
But that's not what's been sort of said. Like, for example, Pat Brown at Impossible, like, just will die on the hill that heme is the most important thing for flavor generation.
Mhm.
Do you, first up, like, do you agree with that or disagree, or like, where do you land? Obviously, that you're producing cultivated fat. So where is it in there? Like, what is its role?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important also to acknowledge that when we're making cultivated fat, we're not only making fatty acids and lipids and stuff like that, right? So fat is usually used to describe a couple different things. Like there are the actual nutritional molecules that are fat, your fatty acids, your triglycerides, etc. And then there's, when we refer to animal tissue, we also refer to that tissue as fat. So like fat that you'd find on like a piece of bacon. And so the fat in animals is a little bit more complicated. It contains aromas, it contains other functional proteins and molecules that are responsible for interacting with the actual fat molecules to create this overall sensory experience. That's why you can't just, get some, for example, I don't know, palm oil or coconut fat or something like that, and blend that into a plant-based product and get the same difference in sensory performance that you get with our cultivated fat. And so, we've done our own third-party sensory tests, where we've essentially taken the leading plant-based comparator, our product, and a conventional comparator, for example, for meatball. We did this, and we find that there's almost a one-to-one preference to our fat, or not only our fat, our finished product, which contains our cultivated fat and plant protein, to conventional meatball. And we're significantly preferred, I believe the exact number is about 2-to-1 to the leading plant-based product. And so I think that is a bit of a proof of case of how much value the fat itself is adding, where we're getting almost to the performance of the conventional comparator, not quite there, but almost there, but we're way ahead of the leading plant-based alternative, which might include proteins like heme. I do think heme can be an important flavor driver. I'm not a food scientist myself, but I will say that my thesis has been, let's just make the same thing in a better way and put that into a product and let the same thing do the work and not try to recreate the sensory profile, because I think that's significantly more challenging from at least technical perspective.
Yeah, I've had Pat on the show, and we didn't get a chance to get into it, but I don't agree with him that heme is. I think it's important. It's not that important.
Sure.
And I think that it's participates in the Maillard reaction, and which I think is really important, obviously. But like, I agree. At the end of the day, like, it was a very early revelation to me at Upside Foods when I was running the product division that like the sort of chickeniness of something, the species flavor, species specific flavors were driven by fat, not protein. That was like a big realization that like goat tastes like goat because of its fats and and then vis-a-vis what the animal ate, its diet. Cows, chickens, pick your animal. Assuming you agree with that, what have you like honed in on like what makes sort of the pork flavor porky? Like, have you been able to do that? And to the extent you can talk about it, of course, like, what have you found?
Yeah, it's a good question. The short answer is no. We haven't done that much characterization work on that sensory optimization. I think there's a lot of ample opportunity there for whatever those aromas or those molecules are to enhance them. What we have worked on are the nutritionals. So one thing that we've been surprised about is the fact that how much the pork fat cells are what they eat. So for example, if we want to make an omega-3 rich pork fat, all that involves is giving the cells more omega-3. If we want to have a lower saturated fat pork fat, that just involves giving the cells less saturated fat. And so that's been something that we've looked at from a characterization perspective. We find that our product is basically like lard. where once you add it to a protein or whatever other product and you cook it, that's really when the flavors are extenuated and when there's a big sensory differential that is produced within whatever you're adding it to. And that's where we see most of the benefit. But I still think there's some work to do there and understanding, I think just going back to kind of one of the operating principles is if you're making the same thing in a different way, you should get the same sensory experience. I think that's true. And we're finding that to be true. And I think that is what's doing most of the driving, not as much understanding specifically what is in that thing or, because that's kind of been the challenge. No one's really been able to understand that. So no one's really been able to recreate that. And instead we're saying, hey, we don't really need to understand it. We just need to make it. And we can, make it healthier if we want. For now, we're sticking to kind of like conventional comparative nutritionals, so we're not doing omega-3 enhanced fat, for example, or low saturated fat, pork fat, but that's also an opportunity we have in the future.
Yeah. And for those listening, when someone's mentioning conventional comparators, he's talking about like animal pork fat in this case, and then, when we say sensory, that's also shorthand for flavored aroma and taste analysis and all that stuff. So, No. It's a lot of people here know some of this, some don't, but just want to make sure we're on the same page. But I wanted to follow up on something specific you said. Yeah. There's an interesting thing about how cells grow. You mentioned, if I want the omega-3s to go up, I add omega-3s. How much of this of fat, I think people don't realize, like when you're growing adipose tissue, fat tissue or cells, how much of it is just absorption of like fats that are available to them that they then accumulate effectively inside the cell versus how much they use something to synthesize it and make it into a fat? Like, what's that breakdown like for the process?
Yeah, totally. Without talking about trade secret that we have internally too much. Basically, one of the reasons why we chose to go with pork fat is because actually most of the fatty acids, so these are when you talk about saturated fats or monounsaturated fats or trans fats, those are actually pertaining to particular types of fatty acids. So the fatty acids that the body makes, that all usually happens inside the liver, for example, in humans, inside the liver. And that's the case in most farm animals. Pigs uniquely make those fatty acids in the actual fat cells. So an advantage to working with pig cells is that when they're becoming fat cells, they don't need any extra machinery or any other organ, or you don't need to be growing any other cell type to have that same fatty acid production happen. And so you have the option of both giving the feed sources of how they make the fat, of what they make the fat with, to them. For example, these are very simple molecules we're all kind of familiar with: glucose, glutamine, which is just an amino acid. You can either give those feed sources to the cells and have them create those fatty acids that they then put into their fat droplet, or you can give them their fatty acids directly. And once you give them those fatty acids directly, they will incorporate those into that same fat droplet that they're forming internally. And the extent to which they choose to do either one of these two things is driven by kind of what you feed them and what you signal to them to do. So there's a lot of tunability there. We currently use somewhat of a combination of both. So it is a little bit of what they're fed, and it's a little bit of what they want to make kind of naturally.
That's fascinating. I didn't realize that pig cells didn't have to rely on the liver per se for fatty acid synthesis. That's really fascinating. And it's interesting because you often see that pigs and humans are often compared as very comparable biology. But humans rely on their liver to synthesize the fatty acids.
I was surprised too. Yeah, for that exact reason. I think a lot of us coming from like the biomedical space, right, see that pigs are often like a model organism, but there are always these key differences. That's why no model organism is perfect.
Exactly. And so maybe sort of another question is, like, there's lots of different pig breeds and like they have different reasons, for flavor profile. How did y'all, again, you don't have to describe exactly which breed or what have you, but how did you choose the sort of one you use, or do you use multiple versions? Like what was the rationale for that? Like, were you trying to go for maximum familiarity and flavor and aroma, or what was convenient to get at the time, or what have you?
I think you just hit on both the main points, which was yes. I think for our first products, we kind of wanted three things. So one you already mentioned, which is maximum familiarity, right? The second thing was what was available. We're located in the U.S. And then the third is also, what from this is kind of an offshoot of convenience, but where can we get pigs that are really healthy, and where do the logistics make sense? So because of that, we kind of went with the most widely consumed U.S. pork breed, which is Yorkshire. And I can't talk about specifically how we got the cells, like what part of the body we got them from. But, when you think of bacon, which is one of our flagship products, that's usually in the belly region. So we did focus quite a bit on the belly region to get the right cells and the best cells from that area.
Also, there's different types of fat. Like when I'm doing butchery for like brisket, what have you, when you're trimming it down, you often are trimming out what's considered hard fat that's not going to render well, versus
Yep.
some of the subcutaneous fat that tends to render very nicely. And then, of course, you have intramuscular fat. How did you all think about the different fat types when you also were approaching sort of product design? Was that a part of the process, or again, were you just like, I'm going to grab different types of fat and we'll see what works? Because that's a viable approach too.
It was. We did some of this research in the early days. So, we only need to take a very small sample. Like in reality, you need even, at least for our process, less than 10 grams of cells and 10 grams is in weight, it's like $10. 10 single dollar bills, and in size it's smaller. It's like a speck. I know for people who aren't watching this on video, I'm holding my fingers together and kind of pinching them. It's really small. You would not be able to, you can hold it between your fingers. But basically, we did look at different fat depots, and we did look at different kinds of white fat, and we did take these very small samples and compare how the cells fattened and how they proliferate and stuff like that. I wouldn't say, I still think there's a lot of work to do there. I would say a really exciting thing in the future is from a process optimization standpoint, it doesn't take a lot more effort to grow a Mongolitsa or an Iberico ham or pork fat product. And just for context, Mongolitsa pork fat is basically like the Wagyu beef of pork. And Iberico ham is a very popular kind of like delicacy ham that's grown, that's in the Iberian Peninsula in Western Europe. So we can make all kinds of really cool products and make all kinds of kind of like what are considered delicacy or high-end pork fat products without needing to go through some of the, dealing with some of the behavioral specific requirements that maybe these breeds have that make them unique or hard to work with in just standard animal agriculture or industrial animal agriculture settings. For us, working with cells is working with cells. There's very limited differences in terms of how we have to tune our process or our environment to accomplish that.
So switching gears just slightly, I'm curious a little bit, because you know so much about this and you've been in this field for a long time. And again, you're the first employee at Mission Barns, and Mission Barns itself is one of the first companies in this space. What, not just like what brought you to it, because I think we all come to this with some semblance of an alliance towards the future, building a better future, better food system. But what's maybe a better question is like, what's kept you around? Like, why have you stuck around and worked through the trials and tribulations? Because we'll talk about some of those tribulations in a little bit. But what has motivated you to stick with it for so long?
Yeah. Short answer is I really believe in it, and I really think that it can make a very massive impact to this day. And I think we have the right technical strategy. I think we have the right business strategy as a company, which makes it easy to keep going. And when I see kind of what we have going on internally, and that we have solved everything that's come our way and that we've continued to move forward, that's the short of it. But from a more large scale or philosophical perspective, I still think this is one of the biggest problems in the world. And I'm not going to give up on it. I think ultimately, I've kind of said this a couple of times, but I think the only way to meet consumers on producing meat a better way and giving them what they want is to have good product quality and low cost. And I still think the best way to accomplish good product quality and low cost for meat is just to make it in a better way. And so I think cultivated is that way. I got into this thing 10 years ago at this point, almost 11 now. And I got into it for sustainability, animal welfare, public health, all the reasons we talk about. We can be a lot more land efficient. We can be a lot more water efficient. We don't risk zoonotic disease. We don't risk creating more greenhouse gas emissions, Amazon rainforest deforestation. These are all things that this industry and this technology can help solve. And I don't think any of that's changed. I just think we need to approach it the right way. And I'm still confident that we are approaching it the right way here. So, yeah.
I agree. Why I continue to work in the space as well. I think that it is still as much as investors and the public and the press would have you believe, like the death of this industry has been greatly exaggerated. And we have just going through a normal cycle, which just happens in every technology, which is the sort of trough of disillusionment, as it's called. But I don't even know if it's disillusionment. It's just people having to do the work to figure out how to run a profitable business or revenue generating business. Like, that's not easy when you are building the ship as you fly it. And to have such what I'll actually consider a fairly mature science where literally nothing existed 10 years ago. It wasn't even an industry. There was no industry. And now we are a decade in and finally figuring out like exactly the business models that are going to work. I'm confident that we'll have products in market that are competing. And obviously like Mission Barns gets to be the first fat product, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
So looking back when you joined Mission Barns, I love asking people, so two somewhat related questions. What has your time at Mission Barns taught you? Like what food myth do you just wish would die? And the only way you would have known it is if you'd gone to work at a food company or a cultivated company. And the second is a little bit more conceptual, which is just like, what's been the biggest lesson you've learned over this last nearly 11 years?
Oh, that second one, there's so many. But yeah, on the food myth one, I think people bucket processed foods into one category. And I think that's problematic because how you process the food's important, right? So I've heard of cultivated meat as referred to as like an ultra processed food. I would argue that it's very unprocessed. We certainly do bioprocessing, but I think when people think of processed foods, they often think that there's additives or that there are certain modifications made to the food that introduce health problems or some unbeknownst challenge for individuals who are consuming it, like allergenicity, stuff like that. And I think what we're doing with cultivated, at least at Mission Barns, is making the process as close as possible to what happens inside the animal. And we're not adding anything to our process. Like, for example, all in our media, which is just the feed that we give the cells, everything that's in there is you basically find it in the animal, or you find it, at very safe concentrations. Like everything's very well controlled. And this idea that it's lab grown meat, right, or that things are experimental is not the case. By the time we get to production, everything has been obviously cleared by a regulatory agency. But not only that, it's you do all kinds of sensitivity analyses to see if you're changing the concentrations of certain components, or if you have this failure mode or this failure mode, what's happening. So I just think this notion of bundling all foods that could be classified as processed into a single category and having a general aversion to them is probably the biggest loose attribution. And I understand where it comes from, because people can't really distinguish, and there have been foods that are processed in the past that aren't good for you. And so it's just generally safer to eat whole foods or unprocessed foods. I think that is true. But I don't think that every single food that involves some processing should be categorized the same way. That's all. So that's on the food myth side. And then, sorry, your second question was
the lessons learned over the last 11 years that you'd be like, ooh, I want more people to know this about working in startups or life in food or anything, just becoming a leader, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, totally. Man, there's been so much I've learned. It's really hard to pick one thing, but I'll just I guess I'll just talk about maybe what it takes to get to even year 11. It takes a lot of grit, and whatever you're doing, if it's really hard, and if it's going to take some real effort and some real innovation, just know you really want to do it, because people are going to tell you it's not possible. There's going to be waves. There's going to be, sometimes it looks great, sometimes it looks worse. Whatever, the timelines are going to shrink in certain cases. You're going to be like, oh my goodness, I didn't know we were going to solve this quick. Other times it's going to take a really long time, and you're going to be like, damn, I wasn't expecting this. I think coming at everything with an even keel mindset and knowing that you want to do it. Like one saying that I used to say when I was doing a lot of test taking in school, and I was like, it doesn't help me to stress when I test take. Why don't I just keep calm and optimize? And I've just kind of like carried that throughout my life. Is like, just know you really care. Look very honestly at yourself and look at what you're doing and saying, does this still make sense? Don't be scared to abandon things. Don't be scared to pivot, but like, if you still believe in it, you got to keep going, and you have to have, yes, an independent view on things. You also have to incorporate what other people are saying and what other people are thinking. People have unique perspectives. Do not be audacious, but also, if you have conviction around something, don't forget why you have that conviction around it. So it's just, I guess, that balance of suspension of doubt and belief, where you're believing, where you're just evaluating things continuously, and before you even go into it, if you know what you're doing is challenging, making sure that it's what you want to do. If I had to summarize it,
I completely agree, and I would say, like, I can almost always tell if someone has a startup background because they are deeply comfortable with two things that you mentioned. One, they are very fine to sit in uncertainty. Like,
yeah.
And I don't know right now is a perfectly acceptable answer. And then somewhat related to that is, if asked, if you prompt them to make a decision, they'll make it. They'll just say, okay, right now, I think this is the answer, but tomorrow it might be different. And the second thing is a willingness to change their mind in the light of new evidence. I can tell, those things tell me that you have been successfully in an environment where you will never have all of the information you need. You will never have all the money you need. You will never have all the time, and you still have to make a decision that seems like it's the best. And you can't teach that, in my opinion. You have to just go through it. I did not have those skills when I started startups. I definitely did not.
I certainly didn't either.
So if you're listening and you're considering a startup, I mean, I will say, for whatever you do afterwards, those skills are incredibly helpful. Being able to just sort of calmly think through very hard, uncertain problems. That's not a skill that you get to develop very often. But speaking of uncertainty, I want to talk about the regulatory process.
Yeah, sure.
First off, if you are listening and you don't know, food in this country is regulated by FDA, and if it's meat, poultry, or certain types of seafood, it is U.S. Department of Agriculture regulated. And all food has to be safe to eat, like under the law. And there's different ways we can accomplish that. And without going into too much of the law, cultivated meat is considered, still regulated by FDA for safety and USDA for suitability, and we have to go through this process. But I was wondering if you could take us through, because you've had a unique experience with the government. I think that most people don't. I've had FDA people on this show. I'm former FDA.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you, like what your experience has been like working with the U.S. government on a novel food and process, and over the years, how you've dealt with the changes in administrations and policy, and just I think it'd be helpful to just talk about like what it took to actually get to where you are, so that you could legally sell these products.
Totally. It was a long process. I think the total duration from engagement to the no questions letter. So when we first talked to the agency up until the point when they said, "Hey, we've reviewed all of your materials and we've asked all the questions there is to ask. Here's your no questions letter." That entire duration, I believe, was about 3.5 years. And that was in an environment with no established guidance, right? Just for folks who are listening, usually food products go through either the GRAS process, generally recognized as safe, novel food products, that is, or they go through the food additive petition, depending on certain characteristics. In the case of cultivated meat, cultivated fat, the agency decided neither one of these frameworks were suitable. So we had an informal consultation process in which things were done more on a case-by-case analysis basis. And because of that reason, there weren't any pre-established timelines associated with that process. And there was no guidance. So we were going into it analyzing our process really comprehensively and really holistically for all the standard things you would do in a food safety kind of like analysis and a regulatory clearance. But over the course of the process, the end document we have, I have these stats here somewhere, but it was roughly, I think, 300 pages of discourse, over 100 Q&A, back and forth. I think we measured 500 plus product representative data points. So those are things like the vitamins, the minerals, the fatty acids, different concentrations of residuals, stuff like that, making sure that all of the things that we're measuring are substantially equivalent to the conventional comparator, which just means, are they the same as what's in conventional pork fat sufficiently? So we can conclude that we're not introducing any novelty here, novel food risk. It was my first time going through the regulatory process, and I think I had an amazing team around me, we did really well. First cultivated fat approval in the world, first cultivated pork approval in the world, and it was no joke. The agency had a lot of questions, and most of it, like I said, was kind of demonstrating that we were substantially equivalent to the conventional comparator. In this case, we're not introducing something that's brand new. It's just something made the same. It's the same thing made in a different way, so it's a bit different, I think, than other clearances, but it's not quite GRAS is the way it was classified. So, happy to talk about anything based off that. I kind of just
No. I think it's important. People, I constantly say cultivated meat products that are approved in the U.S. are arguably the most studied food to ever have been introduced into the market. For those of you that are worried about like and on top of it, let me ask, there's 2 agencies have to sign off on it. So it's not just one food agency, 2 have to sign off on it. And the safety aspect is extensive. It is the equivalent of a really long book.
Yeah.
Being written. In this case, I always tell people it is a PhD doctorate. It is a dissertation written about the safety of your product.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of scientists and medical doctors and veterinarians review it, and peer review it like a paper, like they would. Yeah. So it gets ripped apart, as it should be.
Yeah.
So to allay any fears of consumers and people listening, cultivated meat arguably is the safest meat product we've ever made, in terms of just its safety evaluation.
Yeah, I mean the amount of
Second,
the
go
amount
ahead,
of
go
data.
ahead.
Oh, I just want to add there, like the amount of data we have on these products is insane. Like I'm, it's actually really cool. It's really cool to know all the compositional things we know. But anyway, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. I just
No,
want.
but you're also right. Like, if we subjected conventional meat products to some of
Yeah,
these tests, they wouldn't pass in
yeah,
terms of
yeah.
like microbial loading, for example,
Hmm.
like the amount of bacteria is present, the sterility of the way that they're harvested. Again, all of that stuff. I'm not saying we should do that, but like conventional meat products are held to a very high standard. It's a different standard. It's just
Yeah.
not extensive. They're not extensively tested the way that cultivated products are.
Hmm.
Um, but like to your point about like the process, what that meant was, and I know typically FDA makes decisions on new ingredients within 6 to 18 months,
Yeah,
like generally, statistically. And y'all were sitting at over 3 years. I
yeah.
know products that took 2 decades to get through um, new food approvals. Um, what I'd love to hear a little bit from you, because we know some people from the administration listen and have been on the show. What are some things that the FDA, USDA did particularly well? First off, I
Mm.
think it's important to say things that they did well, and second, where are places you definitely think things could improve in terms of for like future companies that are going through this process?
Yeah, it's a good question. Um, I was actually impressed with the types of questions that they were asking. They did, I think, have a pretty good handle on what were the right questions to ask, and they were the things that we had thought of. And we had to articulate them, obviously. But yeah, I think the comprehensiveness of the process, I think, was really good, right? I think they looked at a lot of things. I think they wanted, for example, every nutritional, they wanted a measurement on if we were adding, for example, if we're adding a vitamin to our media, they want to know how much that vitamin is in the cell. They want to make sure the cell is metabolizing or like eating that vitamin, just like how it's eating it inside the body. They want to know that our cells are stable genetically, right? They want to know, hey, can you make so much of the, depending on how much of this stuff you make, is it going to retain process consistency, right? So they asked, I think, a lot of good questions, and their review was really comprehensive. um, I think they need a little bit more support and a little bit more funding, because I think at times things were slow. So when you want to do a comprehensive good job, but you also want to uh, uh, if you want to do that, but it's a cost quality time trade off, right? If you want high quality and you want low time, you have to have high cost. And so I think the agency probably needs some more staffing to handle the volume of these cultivated food applications that are coming through. I would say that would be my main piece of feedback, is that sometimes things were quite slow. But yeah, in terms of quality, I think the quality was very good. And so, yeah, I would encourage the administration to put food innovation kind of at the top of their docket, and really make sure that we still have this high level of scrutiny and of safety analyses for our products, but just that we can do it a little bit faster. That would be my main piece of feedback.
Yeah, I would agree. And the drug industry for FDA side of things has figured this out to your cost triangle,
Yeah.
or the timing triangle, which is that biopharmaceutical and pharmaceutical companies pay half of FDA's budget, um, and then trade off they get to hire more people, and then they have guaranteed timelines for decisions made. And the food side does not have this really. We don't
Mhm.
pay what are called user fees. Now, it has been described, I think, as a fair criticism, is it is a conflict of interest. Like the
Yeah,
industry that's regulated is paying for the regulator to do this part of the work.
totally.
But I do think that it has been a net positive, in the sense that all it does is it doesn't guarantee a yes. It just guarantees a decision by a certain date.
Hmm.
And I think cultivated doesn't even have that.
Hmm.
It's an open-ended question, when you will get a decision on
Yeah,
your product. And that's true for any new product, candidly, unless you're going through a grass application. Um, so the process was extensive, and an incredible amount of questions asked of you on the product. you get it out to market. I'm sure there was a lot of relief and celebration. And then you have to deal with USDA. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about your interactions with USDA and how that, because I don't think a lot of people know how that works, but you have to deal with them too. And then I'd love to hear a little bit, of course, like what's next? What's the next step? But maybe we start with USDA and talk a little bit about what it's like to work with them.
Yeah. So USDA reviews our process for suitability. FDA reviews it for safety. Now, I won't get into the details of what that means, but basically, USDA will come by every time we're essentially harvesting a batch of our cultivated fat cells, meaning that we make one batch, we're taking it out of our cultivator, right? And they essentially inspect the whole process from the point that we take it out to the point that's in its final container, after all the downstream processing, which just includes essentially washing the cultivated fat cells. So that's their kind of like jurisdiction, what they look at for our process. They've also looked at the reagents involved in that downstream process. So like the saline we're, for example, washing our cells with. It's I think relative to the FDA, it's a lot more straightforward. I think, they defer to the FDA for safety analyses. So, we just actually had them come by, I believe it was yesterday, not the day before, but time's flying over here, so it's hard to say. For example, they reviewed all of our documentation to make sure that our sanitation protocols, meaning how we're cleaning all of our environment and surfaces, is clean. I think, they're coming over from conventional animal agriculture where it's a lot more of an open system, right? You might be like putting a piece of meat onto like some surface or some table or something to process it. But for us, everything is sterile. Everything's aseptic processing, which just means that by design, there are no microbes on any of the surfaces that any of the cells are touching. So it's an extremely clean product at the end of the day. So we're good. I think the level of scrutiny that they're used to applying is a couple notches, below what we apply to ourselves. So it's been relatively straightforward. I think the main things they're looking for are like, we're not adding any additive, right, to make our cells to have any particular properties. And, with conventional meat processing, sometimes that's the case. Sometimes you spray the meat with something, or you coat the meat with something before it goes out, and you just have to make sure that process is to spec. So yeah, it's very straightforward relative to FDA.
And so then what's next? You're going to ostensibly be on market and selling. And so what are the immediate plans? And I'm very curious to see, like, what are the products you wish people were developing now that with what you know? But let's start with where are y'all going?
Yeah, so I think a lot of our work to date has been platform engineering. So we've set up our whole supply chain to be animal-free, cost scalable. We've set up our bioreactor to be scalable. Our cultivator is and just for terminology here, cultivator or bioreactor, this is just the vessel in which the cells are growing. It's just temperature controlled. It's sterile, meaning that it's an isolated environment where the microbes that are normally like in air or on other surfaces aren't there. It's what we use to warm the cells. So it's a little container that's warmed, and then we pump feed called cell culture media into it and out of it to give the cells the nutrients they need and to get rid of the waste that they don't. So that's a cultivator. So we've actually designed and fabricated and have begun to scale up to the pilot scale, which is what we're using to make these first batches of cultivated fat cells, this novel bioreactor. But we need to go a lot bigger, right? So we're looking to in the next phase of the organization, go to commercial scale instead of pilot scale, and to reduce costs of goods and services. And the whole goal of the company up until now has been to de-risk all of the novel discovery-based workflows, right? So we haven't, no one's made a porcine cell line that goes through the regulatory process that has a tunable but a fatty acid profile that's similar to conventional pork fat, or at least that has been demonstrated sufficiently to be similar to conventional pork fat, that has all of the other nutrients also in check from a safety perspective. A media formulation that goes with it that's animal component free. We have also proprietary coating and harvest reagents. I won't get into all the technical details here, but we built a lot of technology around making our cultivated fat cells at this scale and for it to be scalable, but now it's time to scale. So I think that's really the big focus of our next phase of the company, and we've already started working on it since we've gotten the clearance. And yeah, in terms of future products, I want to try Mangalitsa pork fat at scale. With the system we're making, it's what I say is cell type agnostic, which basically means it's as easy to grow pork fat cells as it is to grow duck fat cells or beef fat cells. And so I think in the future, we could make those different cell types in there pretty easily. And on top of that, we can make tissue. So right now we're making cultivated fat cells, which you can imagine is kind of like lard. But in the future, we can make whole cuts of fat that you can throw onto whatever you're interested in throwing it onto. So yeah, those are some of the things I'm interested in.
Do you see, or I should say, are we going to see, like a Beyond Burger or an Impossible Burger, with animal, cultivated fats in it? I feel like that's a natural place for some of this. Are you seeing any, maybe a better question is, are you seeing any interest from the plant-based or the mycelium, the fungus-based protein communities for your product?
Yeah, definitely. That's inherent to our business model, right? So as much as we make our own products in-house, like our meatball, our bacon, our sausage, our cultivated fat is a potent flavor and can be added to a variety of food products, not only, other plant-based meats, like you mentioned, like a Beyond Burger or even like a tofu or something like that, but also to things like beans, right? Sometimes canned beans or baked beans have animal fat added to them just as a flavor enhancer. So I think there's a whole variety of food products that we can add our cultivated fat to give them that sensory oomph. And there's also some functionality that our fat provides for cosmetics and other industries too. So I think as much as we're a cultivated food company, as in we provide finished products to consumers, we're a B2B company that creates a technology to give to other folks to make cultivated fat using our platform. And also we produce cultivated fat to give to other folks to incorporate into their products and provide sensory or otherwise functional performance enhancements.
Yes, I was thinking you anticipated my question, which was like are there non-food uses that you all have envisioned? And I was going to suggest cosmetics. Are there other? I guess maybe it's like, is there been organic interest well beyond food for some of these products? I can imagine there has been.
There has been, I think, probably business side of the company knows a little bit more about that. But short answer is, yeah, I know we've talked to all kinds of folks, and yeah, we have all kinds of LOIs and partnerships right now. But yeah, I don't know where those stand in terms of disclosure, or
Sure.
I don't know. So
well, yeah. Okay. Then, so what types of products do you envision? Now that you know how to do this, like what products do you wish existed? Maybe like if you told somebody tomorrow, hey, they have some money to start a company in this space, but they wanted to, like, what would you tell them to start? Like, what problem would they go after?
I see to help cultivated fat.
Or in general, yeah, just like based on what you know, and you said, all right, go into this area of food production. We need products like this.
Got you. Yeah, I think the field has some pretty good supporting companies around it right now. So, for example, the media supply chain, tons of people are working on making media that's not biopharma grade, not food grade, but is instead cultivated grade, and we can use it to make cultivated fat cells with the right quality and cost considerations. I think there's still the whole area of metabolomics and proteomics. All of this is very interesting. I know a lot of people with the success of AlphaFold and with just AI's boom in large language models and all of the consumer interaction with AI recently has made that a really buzzy area. I think for cell culture broadly and for cultivated food production broadly, it's a data problem. We don't really have the sensors to get the data that's required to really leverage some of these systems. So I would be really interested in companies who are doing real-time analytics for cell culture. I think that's a very interesting area of work, and it doesn't have to be like, we know this exact metabolite is at this concentration, but rather it's like, here's a general profile for spectroscopy. Sorry, it's getting too technical for the audience, but here's an exact profile in terms of spectroscopy or otherwise for this media or for this food product. And we've linked it to these outputs, these sensory outputs or these cell outputs. And I think the problem there has been really getting the data, not that the models don't exist to really make sense of that data anymore. That's why AlphaFold was so successful, because the data was amazing, right? We had these giant protein databases that scientists over I think it was at least 2 decades put together by doing really hard crystallography work and spatial characterization work of these proteins, and really working hard to sequence them also. So that's a particularly interesting area for me, is sensors for AI applications for cultivated or just cell culture broadly.
I think there is for the meat itself. There's a world of you and myself and others are focused on what it is, what is fat, or what meat is, what fat is. There's a world where what can fat be?
Yeah.
And those products don't yet exist. And that's what I'm particularly excited about, is that future idealized fat that we can't even conceive of right now.
I can tell you right now, man, I am predisposed to cardiac disease. My cholesterol's already high. I'm pretty young. All right. I would love some omega-3 heavy pepperoni. Don't get me wrong. That sounds great to me. So I think I'm selfishly, if you see our investment dollars going in one direction, don't look at me too close. I might have been pushing certain products.
That's great. Speaking of, what other groups beyond Mission Barns are doing the coolest, most interesting work in food or beyond, in your opinion, and why? Who do you just admire the shit out of?
Yeah. It's a good question. I wish I wasn't so focused on.
I was gonna say, if you had any time to think beyond your job.
Yeah, no, totally. I have a broad appreciation for folks. Again, not to show how San Franciscan I am, but I have a broad appreciation for folks doing biotech applications for AI, or kind of integrating AI in real world, not real world as in LLMs aren't real world, but just some more physical stuff. I think that's really cool. And I think, folks who are really pushing the boundaries on synthetic bio, I think it's really cool. But yeah, I just generally admire anybody working on things that are meaningful. I have so many friends that are doing stuff like this, and there's a lot of good to do in the world. And I think corporate law and consulting and finance and these are huge talent mind sucks. I think they're great. They give people the resources they need to have really nice lives. But I just really admire when people are working on hard problems that maybe, at least initially, aren't the most lucrative and they're risky. But hey, someone's got to do it to push us forward as a humanity. I think there's tons of examples of those, but no particular one sticks out to me right now. I think I've been staring at our cultivators for too long to see a world outside of this one.
That is a great message to end today's interview on. Thank you so much for being on Food Truth, Saam. You can find more information about Saam Shahrokhi, Chief Technology Officer at Mission Barns, in the show notes below. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like addressed here on the show, feel free to reach out directly. I'm your host, Eric Scholze. See you next time on Food Truth on the Spoon Podcast Network.